What is the Torah hashkafa with? It's more than just healthcare. It's more like any so-called risk taking when it comes to health. Like, and for instance, there's any scientific study that comes out saying there's a risk for something have to be reckoned with, or when does it have to be reckoned with, and when it comes to healing, how far should one go, and what was the Torah hashkafa on alternative medicine?
Well, first of all, you're asking questions that touch on halacha, and a very good book came out recently by Rabbi Tatz on medical issues in general. I think he has a whole section there on taking risk and different types of medical intervention. He is a doctor, after all. Now, risk-taking is tricky. First of all, as I heard from Rabbi Heinemann in Baltimore 100 years ago, when the study comes out and says, if you do A, you are 100 times more likely to suffer than if you do B, that tells you very little. Maybe B is 1 in 10 million, and A makes it 1 in 100,000. That's insignificant. Don't be content with a finding that gives you merely a comparative figure. What you want is the absolute figure, and that's number one. Number two, there's a famous tshuva of Rav Moshe about whether you can take a job that involves risk, and he said you can, because when the Gemara discusses Bal Talin Schar Sachir, don't delay paying a worker. The Torah uses the words Ke'elav hu nosein nafsho, because he gives his soul for that. So the Moshe said, let's say we're taking a person who's picking dates from a tree. So he climbs up the trunk, climbs out on the branch in order to pick the dates. Now there were other methods, but that's one way to. So, and the Torah takes that for granted. That's why you shouldn't delay paying him. He risked his life in order to be able to do the work that you're paying to do. Don't make him wait overnight to get paid. So Rabbi said, obviously, the Torah is taking it for granted that you can do things professionally which are risky. Another thing to keep in mind, we have a din of makkah. To put up a fence, guardrail, any place where there might be any danger, right? Is it mutter for a Jew to walk in a place that ought to have a makkah but doesn't? If I remember correctly, there's no restriction whatsoever. There's no restriction whatsoever. Yes, if you are the owner of the house, you have to put up a makkah, keep all the nofel imenu, and you will be implicated on what happens to him. But being in a place where there's no guardrail, not by itself, talking about hayat 10 tefachim, we're not talking about a beast, is not. And then if you want to go mountain climbing, and I don't know of any prohibition. The real question will be, for example, going on a pleasure drive just because you want to go on a drive, knowing the statistics of accidents, whether that's an appropriate thing to do. And I don't know where to draw the line. Then I don't know the dynamics of it. Nishmata mo'od l'nafshesechem does apply. How dangerous was it in ancient times when uncovered liquids could be visited by nachashim v'akrovim, and they could leave behind traces of poison in the water? And I guess versus how much do you lose by not drinking that water? Remember putting a cap on your water. I don't know the real dynamics of it. I wouldn't think that bungee jumping was appropriate from the Torah's point of view. But beyond that, I don't know. But I do believe that Rabbi Tatz has a section in his book, so it would be worth looking it up.
And alternative medicine?
Alternative medicine, I think, I know one source that's relevant to it. Rabbi Meisman brings it in his book. There's machlekes. The Rambam took a position, sort of, and the Rashba tried to figure out what his position was, and he wasn't sure. And then the Rashba definitely took a position on the subject. Here the problem is Darkei Amori. What procedures are forbidden by Darkei Amori? Now, the answer is anything which you have good enough reason to think will actually help your health. That's not considered Darkei Amori. Darkei Amori is only when, so to speak, it's superstitious. What do you need in order to have good enough reason to convince you that it is really helpful? So there are two possible positions. One is you have a run of successes, and the other is no. Merely observed correlations isn't enough. You have to have an explanation of why it works. Just seeing a connection is not good enough. You have to have an explanation of why it works. And the Rambam, in one place, makes it sound like a correlation is good enough. Another place makes it sound like you need to have a theory that explains it. The Rashba brings the Rambam and says he can't understand what the Rambam's position actually is. But the Rashba is quite clear that a correlation is enough. You don't need to have a theory. And he gives the example, which many Rishonim used, of the magnet. In their days, and really, in a certain sense, even in our days, there's no explanation as to how a magnet works. You'll ask a scientist, oh, we know that. All the atoms line up. That means each of the atoms is a little magnet, and they're all lined up, so they reinforce each other, so you get a big magnet. Okay, thanks a lot. But why is the little one a magnet? And how, what caused it to be that way? They haven't got a clue. So the Rashba said it's clearly reasonable to rely on magnets. I have no clue why they work. So that would mean, and then you have, for example, testing a kamea. And you test a kamea, you can carry it on Shabbos. So the Gemara has rules for that. One writer can be tested if he writes 3 different kameas for 3 different kinds of conditions and 3 times, and each one works. So then you can trust that when he writes a kamea, it's going to work. It gives you an empirical test, how to test whether there's a reasonable correlation there. So alternative medicine, I think, is the same thing. The truth is that for many of them, the testing that's needed is relatively simple. The fact that they refuse to do it, to me, is very, very suspicious. It's very suspicious. Magnetotherapy. Strap magnets onto places in your body that hurt or that have been strained or suffered injury, and the magnets will help. Right? There, I actually did some studies, and all the studies they did turned out to be negative, except for one where you strap the magnet onto place A, and place B improves. Place A doesn't improve, but place B improves. Why should that be? Nobody knows. Now, people swear by these things because, I'll tell you, a friend of mine tried, he wanted to try magnetotherapy. He had a pain, I think, in his knee, and it was pain for weeks, and he went to doctors, and nobody could help him. And somebody said, why don't you try it? So he had a friend who was doing it, was into it. He talked to the friend about it. The friend said, I'll lend you one, and you'll try it. And he said, fine, I'm willing to try it. They made a meeting that on Monday morning, he would go to his office and pick it up. And guess what? Starting Tuesday, there was improvement. And over a couple of weeks, it improved to the point where it was gone. So my friend is writing me this. And he says, of course, I have to tell you one important thing. On Monday, I forgot to go to his office. I forgot to pick it up. And there was improvement that started on Tuesday and eventually went away. Now, suppose I had picked it up. What would I have said? Oh, look at that, the magnet did it. But as you see, the truth is, the magnet was totally unnecessary because it went by itself. A lot of that is how these things get a reputation. I saw a film of 2 British doctors who went to one of the South Sea islands to witness voodoo medicine. Among other things, voodoo medicine practices external surgery, removal of internal organs that are diseased without any incisions. Here's how it's done. You have terrible pain in your stomach, whatever it is. The guy says, lie down, makes some passes over your stomach with his hand, and then all of a sudden, plop! There's a piece of meat sitting on your stomach. That's it. That's the thing that was bothering you. And he picks it up. So the doctors say, could we examine that? No, it's got to be buried right away. Otherwise the cure doesn't work. Right? That's the internal organ that came out without any surgery or anything. Bury it. So the interviewer asked these doctors, okay, so it's obviously phony. Why do people pay any attention to it? Why do people trust it? So I'll tell you why. Because of all the complaints that people have, they go to the doctor, 70% will go away by themselves. Another 10% will go away because of the placebo effect. Now, the placebo effect is a real physical effect. It's not a joke, and it doesn't mean that the thing he was complaining about was psychosomatic. Trust in the doctor and trust in the lends the body healing powers, and the healing powers can actually change blood counts and all sorts of things, right? So 80% are going to go away. They really are going to go away. If you go and get this magnet, you put it on, you're most likely going to be one of the 80%. You're going to swear the magnet did it. The only way that you can tell that magnets are doing something is to do what's called a double-blind study. Roughly, you have to have a control group, and you have to see that without the magnets, 80% go away, and with the magnets, 97% go away. Then you could say the magnet does something. But you say that it worked in your case, you have no reason to say that. There was a study done, this is now ancient history, but it's very revealing. Psychological counseling services on campus. Most universities have them. So they did the following type of study. Students come, and they say they have some problem, and they ask for counseling. So they classified the problems, and then they divided the people asking for help arbitrarily into three groups. One got counseling from a psychologist on campus. One set up meetings with professors from other departments who are not trained in psychology. And one got no treatment at all. At the end of the year, they re-interviewed these students to find out how they were doing. There was some improvement in each of the groups, and it was roughly the same. And that meant that seeing a psychologist versus doing nothing made no difference at all. But the one who saw the psychologist will swear the psychologist cured him. So it's you ask where these people get their reputation from, because of the people who use it. Some people are going to be. My father, Hashem, used to say, a Jew was a parable. A Jew was in a shipwreck, and he finally ended up on shore in an Arab country. Okay, this is not an ethnically sensitive joke, so I'm telling it anyway. Say, he's in an Arab country, has no means of support, nothing to do. Gets hold of some small containers, and it takes some water, and he colors it, and he sells it. He sells it to pregnant women with a guarantee that if you drink this water, you'll have a boy. And he said, I'm backing my product so that if you don't have a boy, you get your money back. 50% will have boys, he keeps that money. 50% have girls, to get the money back. So for colored water, 50% of them, he keeps the money. What will the mother say? I took this guy's stuff and I had a boy. But it was useless, totally useless. So alternative medicine has to be tested. It has to be tested in a way that you use any other. Algae from the Great Lakes is another one, I'm supposed to cure everything under the sun. And if they avoid doing the requisite testing, then I think they have something to hide, because it's not so difficult to do the testing. Now, I wouldn't be doctrinaire against it. Organic compounds outrun the ability of the human race to explore if we worked on it for 1,000 years. They're endless, because carbon atoms can just link to each other endlessly. So can we know that they're not there? What's it called? Homeopathy, right. So there are two forms of homeopathy. One is you take something that's supposed to be magical stuff, and then you dilute it and keep diluting. Take one drop of water from this solution, and then one drop of water from the next solution. They did some calculations. They diluted to the point where there are no molecules left. There can't be any molecules left of the original stuff.
Memory. The water has memory.
Right, exactly. It magnetizes the water. Remember, the water remembers, so on and so on. Okay, and that's without triple testing. That's absolute nonsense, because it goes against how we know the physical world works. The other type of homeopathy, one's French and one's British, and I always forget which one is which. The other one says the world is full of organic molecules, and vast majority of them have never been tested. There are folk remedies that peoples have all over the world That's because they're using organic stuff, spider stuff, and rats, and trees, and rosins, and mushrooms, and they can have an effect on the body. No question that they can, and no question there's a gigantic area of information out there that no one has processed. Someone who goes to these other societies and looks at what they do can definitely learn things, but then they have to be tested. But that at least is possible. That's something that's possible, but beyond being possible. And I'll tell you something else. My wife has a very sharp observation. Let's take, for example, reflexology. Right? So they manipulate your foot, and it can cure, earaches and everything else. She says, let's say that it's true. Let's say the foot really has that kind of power. Wouldn't you expect from time to time that the reflexologist would make a mistake and injure the person? There's real power to change things in the body. How could it be that it only helps? Wouldn't you expect there to be suits of damages? I went to the reflexologist and pressed that part of my foot, and I lost my hearing in my left ear. So, it's supposed to help, but you did it wrong. You have suits against surgeons, you have suits against chiropractors, right? Somehow there are no suits against reflexologists.
Chiropractors also.
But they're doing something. I know people who've been to chiropractors, and sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes when one person got paralyzed from a chiropractor, they're manipulating your vertebrae. That's not nothing. That's not nothing. Well, they could be dangerous. Some of them are certified. They have schools and everything else. I don't know if they are or not, but they're definitely doing something. Here the question is, are you doing anything at all? So I think that the key element is the testing that needs to be done. And there, I wouldn't be doctrinaire one way or the other. I'd be doctrinaire against the dilution school, but I wouldn't be doctrinaire against the school that's using organic properties. When people talk about conservation, ecology, they talk about losing species. So some people say, there are millions and millions of species. What did I just read now? There's a certain type of fly, and there are 20,000 known species of this fly. Right? So we lost a few thousand species, or a few million species. So what? One of the answers is each species has a different way of living in the world. Well, how that thing lives in the world, how it gets food, how it reproduces, these are all things which could teach us something. If you lose a species, you've lost a unique way of living in the world. And who knows what properties its chemicals have to help or hurt human beings. So I think that alternative medicine has to be treated with a question mark until it's proven to be effective in a particular case. One shouldn't be against it in principle, and the saddest thing is when conventional medicine is given up. And in desperation, he would say, look, they told you you have no hope. And we, at least, are possible. But it may not be possible. It may, in fact, be impossible and just there to take your money when you're desperate. And there are plenty of desperate people, so that's how they live. So I'm suspicious of it, and we had a guy here in the yeshiva. He said he spent 3 years in the South American jungles. And there he learned a cure for diabetes. Now, I'm a diabetic. I'm a type 1 diabetic. You take these pills, and your diabetes will go away. What's in them? Oh, lots of combinations from the jungle, and I can't tell you, and I wouldn't be able to tell you the chemical names anyway. And fine. He presented himself as a religious person, a firm person. I said, how much are the pills? And he told me the price. I said, I'll offer you. You're sure they work? Of course, I know they work. I said, okay, I'll offer you a deal. You give them to me, and I'll take them. If they work, I'll pay you double. Double the price you asked for. If they don't work, I'll pay you nothing. So he said, no, of course not. Next day he came back and realized, if he says no, that's it, he's finished. Right? So he said, okay, right? So I don't know why I did this, but to placate him, I didn't pay him anything, of course, but I took the pills. They had absolutely no effect whatsoever.
You weren't dangerous?
Now, I don't know that they weren't dangerous. What I was thinking of doing is giving them to a chemist and asking him to take it apart and see what's in there. But I lost interest in it. And then the guy went on to someplace else, to sell his grass. But I think alternative medicine, you have to be very careful with it. And it's not all of one thing. Acupuncture, as far as I know, has been demonstrated to work as an anesthetic. It can work to call attention to something. I know of a child who was 14 and he had a bedwetting problem. There's a fellow in Harnov, listen to this, a doctor who got his medical degree from Harvard University, Harvard Med School, and he does acupuncture. And he did acupuncture on this kid, and within a few months the problem went away. Now, could it be it was going to go anyway? Yes. Could it be that just putting in the needles focused the child on it? It got his mind focused on it to the point where he could overcome his unconsciousness at night and do it. Maybe so. But if so, great. You know, the kid ended the problem, and it was over. So that's what I say. It has to be tested. If it isn't tested,
I mean, for instance, homeopathy has gone past that stage. I heard recently that NHRMC, I think it is, National Health and Research Medical Council of Australia, something like that, they did a review study of, I think it was 1,800 studies of homeopathy. The vast majority of them had to discard because they were badly done, too small size. They only were left with 225 studies out of the 1,800, and of that, it came no effect bigger than the placebo. So once we have that, isn't it stupid for a Jew or anyone thinking to follow it? And particularly, why should he be doing something?
Well, let me ask you a question. I don't know if you took it in enough detail. Were these 225 studies of different homeopathic remedies or of the same homeopathic remedy?
I don't know.
But that makes a gigantic difference. You know, there are hundreds of different homeopathic remedies, right? If you say I got 225 studies, and each one studied a remedy, and each one got negative results, that's not very convincing. You want multiple studies of the same thing. You want backed up studies of the same thing, number one.
You want the same ailment and the same treatment.
Bevadai. To classify it as yes or no. There are flukes all the time. Number one. Number two, of course, the homeopathy practitioner will ask, who did the studies? Were they people who believed in homeopathy? Were people who believed in homeopathy on the task force to check that the study was done? There's a lot of politics in this. If you want to see a discussion of this area, it's really horrible. There's a new journal online called Inference, International Review of Science. Okay, I know who runs it, but a paper is a paper. The second issue, which just came out, has an article called Reproductive Failure or Reproductive Problems, something like that. What he means is, when you have medical studies that can't be reproduced, when people do the study over again, they don't get the same results. And they find out the study was badly done and so forth and so on. The standard in medical studies is abysmally low. On the average, maybe 20% are accurate, and 80% are wrong. And people are making medicines, and people are advising treatments, and so forth and so on. So you talk to me about studies like this, I'm suspicious of the whole area, whether it's positive or negative. Now, you have 225 studies, and they all turned up negative. To me, that would be just a flag for caution. But I wouldn't thereby simply discard it. I would ask for a remedy which had been tested carefully, and right? Did they find those tests? Did they, If they told me they surveyed all the tests that have ever been done on homeopathic remedies,
I think that's what the film was.
and then they discarded the vast majority on the grounds that they said the experimental. No, I don't think anybody's without prejudice. If you tell me that this group, whoever they are in Australia, hired,
It's a government body, and they did hire an independent company to do a review.
Yeah, but how many homeopathists were there as part of the study? How many were there to also go through the criteria for evaluating whether the study is good or not? Right? If there are none whatsoever, then one has to worry that there's either prejudice or economic interest driving it, or simple tunnel vision. I'm trained to see things. I see things this way, and I don't see the rest of it. I'm suspicious on all sides. I'm suspicious of the government. I'm certainly suspicious of the practitioners, the people who make money from homeopathic remedies. I'm suspicious of small size and I want to see good evidence. If you're interested in this area, there have been a number of reviews of this area over the last 10 years. One fellow from Greece wrote a damning meta-study of these kinds of things, but this one had more footnotes and more examples than any I've ever seen. I put it on my blog recently. I put the whole thing up on my blog, so you can find it there. That's what I know about alternative medicine.
I just think hashkafically, isn't it like a bit wrong to start going for something which like almost clutching at straws, like maybe it'll work. Like, is there anything wrong in that? Like, we're thinking people, we shouldn't like just go and do whatever. Maybe it'll work.
Yeah, you don't want to invest in a maybe. I think that's correct. And the fact that so and so says that'll help, and you haven't found any other help, that's not a good reason. Mm-hmm. But you can't just classify a whole area as worthless. Mm-hmm. From that area could come out a gem, and each particular item has to be judged on its own merits. But anecdotal evidence is very, very dangerous. When people tell you, I know it works, and you say, how do you know it works? Because I did it and it worked for me. You can't know that. You can't know that it worked. And it works the other way also. A person says, I tried it and it didn't work. That's no proof that it doesn't work. That just means it didn't work for you. If you press it up from 80 to 96, there will be 4% for whom it doesn't work. They can't say it doesn't do anything, because without it, 80% get better. With it, 96% get better. That's why you need that kind of testing to determine whether you should do it or not.
How do you deal with various, I don't know what to call it, observations or statements of fact in Gemara which don't seem to have any... I'm not even going to use the word science, because it's nothing to do with the word science, but because for instance, now Sheni, the whole thing just doesn't seem to have any even relation to what regular physical world we see. So so what? The world have cooled it down. So what? So it's Sheni, now what? Why is it suddenly Sheni and irrational? What's that even going to mean?
Well, you're referring to Tosfos Shita and Sheni.
I actually think Tosfos makes it even worse. You just say, frankly, Gemara says something, we don't understand it. Tosfos asks what it means, and then he answers something which I don't see how he even answers it.
Well, let's see how far you got. I mean, my Chavus and I went through some of this some years ago. A Kli Rishon is something which was heated on the fire. It could be off the fire now, but it was heated on the fire. Now, let's say that it was boiling. It's standing off the fire for 10 minutes. Let's say it's water. The temperature of the water is now 90 degrees centigrade. So you pour that into another Kli. The water is going to heat up the walls of the other Kli, and the water is going to go down in temperature. So is there an obvious difference between Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni?
Okay, so it's cooled down to 80 degrees, and if I have a Kli Rishon at 80 degrees, it is mubashal.
So now the question will be, what the difference between a Kli on the fire and a Kli that's off that never was on the fire is the dynamics of heat. The Kli that's on the fire has heat being poured into it. The Kli that's off the fire, has only and always been losing heat. Now, the question is whether that has any effect on the speed at which the heat is lost. I don't know. In other words, you're right. That's the right way to test it. The Kli Rishon is at 90 degrees. The Kli Sheni, when you pour the water into it, and it comes with equilibrium, is at 80 degrees, water and Kli. How is that different from a Kli Rishon that you put on the fire and you heat it up to 80 degrees and stop heating? But physically, there is a difference between them, because the Kli Rishon had water, had heat entering it to heat up the pot of the contents. This, from the moment it came into existence, the Kli Sheni has been losing heat. That's all. No heat has been. Now, whether that makes a difference of the speed at which the heat will continue to be lost, I don't know. And that's something which a physicist would have to answer. I'm not sure what the answer to that would be.
I mean, it can make it even worse, because Kelly should apply also to even oil, which can go way above 100. So now I have a Kelly oil at 150 degrees, and I pour it into water, the water will boil. What happened there?
You mean if you pour the water into the klisheni with the oil in it?
Yeah, either way around.
Yeah. That's a nice case.
You can do molten steel too. At 2,000 degrees.
So in other words, if you take it just as exercise cost, there's no problem. But if you're telling me that it's because it's going into the kli, and the walls cool it off, the only other thing to say that I know of is this. This actually is in the discussion between the Rambam and the Ramban. When you do Tami mitzvos, let's suppose that you suggest a tam, and when you study the mitzvah, you see there are aspects of the mitzvah that are inconsistent with the tam. What do you conclude? Do you conclude that the time was wrong? Not necessarily. The time could be right, and the cases which are inconsistent, there's some other factor that overrides the time. Doesn't mean the time isn't right. For example, Shiluch HaKen. Is Shiluch HaKen Rachamim? Is it not Rachamim? Remember, Mr. Shatkin also is one man Omer. The other man Omer said it. And the Rambam and the Ramban have a disagreement about it. And if you say, well, Shiluch HaKen only applies ki kerei kansi por lefanecha baderech, but your own birds that you have at home, you don't have to do that, right? So how could it be rachamim? The answer could be it is rachamim, but when you're allowed to have an industry of birds and eggs, and for the sake of the industry, that overrides the time. The fact that the time is not consistent with all aspects of the mitzvah does not mean that the time is wrong. You give an explanation for a mitzvah, you can cite a factor, which is a relevant factor, which might not control every case. It might not control every case. And that doesn't mean the factor isn't a relevant factor. It means that's a relevant factor, but there are cases where something else is more important than that factor. So you can't be too doctrinaire when it comes to Ta'amei Mitzvos.
It's not really a Ta'amei Mitzvos, it's Chazal defining what's Mavash and what's not.
I know, but when the Rishon says a Ta'am, that's no different in principle, in logic, from Chazal saying a Ta'am or the Torah saying a Ta'am. Those who hold Tar Balei Chaim is deraisa. Right? Some learn it from Pre-Cantina. Others learn it from Lo Sachson Shor B'Disho. I think that's where the Rambam learns it. In the Monaruchim, there are various places to learn it from. But not always must you prevent the animal from being in pain. If the way you need it to work causes it pain, typically you're allowed to do that. So what happened to Tzar Lechan L'Raisa? Yes, it is deraisa, and it's an important thing, but there are other features which may override it. So a tam doesn't have to fit every part of every case. So you have to be very careful when you even a Rishon, when they give a time for a mitzvah, to not simply dismiss it because there are counterexamples, especially if the counterexamples are very rare. You know, heating up oil and putting the klisheni and then pouring water in and boiling the water probably hasn't happened since the history of the world began. So the fact that you could construct a case which this time wouldn't work, if the time failed 70% of the time, that would be a serious complaint. But the fact that you can think of a case where the time wouldn't work might not.
Yeah, I'm just saying the whole explanation doesn't seem to answer anything.
Well, as I said, it would be you have to check the physics about
I can't see why.
about whether something where the kli was heated up by the fire is any different from the kli being heated up by the internal contents.
Once are both the same temperature, both can.
Yeah, but things aren't that simple. Things aren't that simple. When you have a fire under a liquid, the liquid forms convection currents. Mm-hmm. And those convection currents have an effect on how the heat is distributed throughout the whole thing. If you never have any fire there, there's no currents. Mm-hmm. So, when you pour it into the Klisheni, there definitely would be no currents. Are there remainders of the currents? Is there some kind of systematic motion in the water that was heated on the fire? What about the metal? If the metal was absorbing heat from the fire, what does it exactly do to the molecules in the metal? Temperature alone may not determine what the molecular state of the thing is. And this just has to be done by experiment and by application of theory. It's a very difficult issue. There's a great deal that we don't understand. I just saw a paper recently that we don't understand the basics of water. We don't understand how water works. We understand why it does, and so to just declare it wrong. And on the third hand, as Rabbi Meisman says in his book, we do not hold a principle that Rishonim have to be right. We don't hold any such principle. Even in Chazal, only when Chazal trace their statement back to Nevuah are we committed that it must be right. But not every statement of Chazal is like that. In fact, I've been talking about this recently with people, but I forgot one of the rayas that he brings. You'll hear people say, Chazal can't make a mistake. If you say Chazal make a mistake, then you're an apikoros. Okay, forget about science. What about halacha? Can Chazal make mistakes in halacha? Well, what happens when Rava says several times, To'us hoya by biyadi, or To'usi biyadi, changed his mind. Changed his mind. Said it was treif, now it's kosher. Said it was tummy, now it's tar. Did he make a mistake? One of the two times he made a mistake, right? They can't both be right. So if Chazal are human, and when they're making their own judgments, they can make mistakes in Torah. Allah is a they can make mistakes in science. So why should we be doctrinaire and say that everything that they say? And Rishonim, for sure. Rishonim have no hesitation in saying about each other that they're wrong, in Torah and in science. So, there's no reason we have to protect it. Here, what bothers me and my charusa probably should bother others as well, is that it's not a question of a mistake, it's a question of a fairly obvious mistake. If you can get to the same temperature, the same way, in two different ways, why should it make a difference, the history of which way you got there? Why should it be? I don't think we got a solution to that question, so it's a good question. I don't think Rabbi Meisman discusses it. I could ask him. I live with him regularly. Try to ask him. Today's Wednesday, Friday morning. I live with him. Try to ask Friday afternoon. Yeah.
So I was thinking, let's say so, you can find people that they go through horrifying things. Let's take the most recent thing, let's say the Holocaust, or even things much less degree. People could have different things happen in their lives. A divorce, and one of the spouses was so to speak, running after them and not trying to hurt them, or tremendous pain, all different things. So the person like that could, I would call it petrified. Will be petrified from life. What would you think would be a cure? Someone that's that gets petrified from life.
Well, you're asking a psychological question, and I'm not a psychologist, but there is a hashkafic question here, which I think is quite important. A person can become overwhelmed by a negative experience, a traumatic experience, and he can lose responsibility for some parts of his life or all of his life. That's something that we understand. This is a kind of victimization. The Baruch Hu put us in a world where A can use his free will to kill B. B will be dead. Right? Somehow, that's overwhelming force which stops B's life altogether. A can mislead B. A can teach B false information, which will destroy his life, set his life on the wrong path altogether, and he can victimize him in that way. It is possible. People have power over other people to harm them in various ways. Causing a person, especially a young person, to have a traumatic experience can leave a mark for life, and that person can be in a position where they're not responsible for what they do when they're under the control of that trauma. So I don't think that the Torah is different here from any other. The Rambam writes, and Esther writes, What about the children of the Karoim? The Karoim taught them their false views. Rambam says they are ke'anusim, and even when they find out that there are Jews and what the Jews' practices are, they remain ke'anusim. Because it's very hard to overcome your whole childhood training, which you trusted from your parents, your teachers, your extended family. They all told you one thing, and now you find a whole group of people tell you differently. Okay, they give arguments. Life has lots of arguments in it. Arguments you can answer, you can't answer. Maybe tell you 2 years from now, I'll think for a minute, I'll think of an answer. Right? You can't hold such a person responsible. So I think that's true with traumatic experiences as well. People who came to the Holocaust and who came out and could not put on tefillin and could not keep Shabbos, and they just couldn't do it. I think it's quite reasonable to regard them as ke'anusim. The fact that there are other people who came to the Holocaust that came out, ne'emanim, ma'aminim, tzaddikim, means that the Holocaust itself wasn't supernatural, overwhelming, but not everybody can stand the same test. Not everybody is able to stand the same test. And for some people, it simply was overwhelming. I don't think anybody can condemn someone who said, look, I just can't do it. I can't do it. I would say more than that. When you're talking about young people, this is only my own feeling. As I said, I'm not trained as a psychologist. But my feeling is that kids, let's say, up through the age of 15 anyway, maybe even older, there's a certain calculated look at the world. Okay, what are you doing for me? What are you doing for me? Are you making a life for me, a place where I can flourish, a place where I can do, where I can accomplish, where I'll be respected, part of a group? Fine. Then I'll play ball. You're not? Then there's nothing in it for me. It's very selfish. It's very selfish. You take kids who have learning disabilities. Many of them in our system don't get the educational support that they deserve and that would help them. And sometimes it does happen that the teachers are not trained to treat them even with minimal respect. I know some pretty horrifying stories about this. And the kid says, in your world, I'm a nothing. And I'm going to remain a nothing. Because who do you respect? You respect, I'm talking about boys now. You respect boys who learn Rabbi Eger and memorize Mishnayos and so on and so on. And I can't do that. And that's going to be that way for the rest of my life. So why should I want your life? Why should I want it? You're not making a place for me, so I'm going to look for a place elsewhere. And even though today, even in Israel, and certainly in America, there are different types of institutions which cater to these children and try to make them feel good about themselves and try to give them a place where they can feel safe and give them trips and so forth and so on, and as much learning as they can handle and so forth and so on. But still, in the back of their minds, they know, the minute I get out of this place, where am I going to go? Who's going to say hello to me on the street? Who's going to give me a job? Who's going to offer their daughter to marry me? I think without a change in the structure of the society as a whole and the way the values of the society as a whole are presented, it's going to be very difficult for these kids to have the confidence that they're going to find a place. Now, I will say something very prejudicial, that the Hasidic world is much better than the Mishnayos world in this respect. Because the Hasidic world has always honored people who work, and even work at very pedestrian jobs. Our daughter lives in Borough Park, and she's part of the Monsey Vishnitz community. And you have Hasidic Shayid there who are shopkeepers, and who move furniture, and who run dry cleaning establishments and so on and so on. And they're respected. They have their seat in shul. They're given an aliyah. People talk to them, are friendly with them. The Rabbi treats them with respect. So the person says, okay, I'm not very bright. I have a good memory. I can't learn, Rabbi Eger, but I have a place. I have a place. That's what a person needs. A person needs to know that he's developing, he's growing into a place where he can be accepted and feel that he has self-respect and honor. If you don't give that to him, the vast majority, I think, are going to say, well, there's no place for me here. There's no place for me here. So, you know, I don't think you can blame. I don't think you can blame them. I think we are failing them. I mean, we are failing them. And the failure can be very, very tragic. I get calls from parents whose kids are going off, from parents. And I call boys going off, and I went to college. And the teacher of philosophy there believes in Spinoza. Now, between you and me, Spinoza, you never heard of Spinoza, he never heard of Spinoza. He was an Epicurus. He lived in Amsterdam, and in Amsterdam they put him in Cherem. He was a noted philosopher. He hasn't been footnoted in 150 years. He's just out of it. He's out. He's part of the history of philosophy. From time to time, person writes a footnote, and Spinoza would have said this, but nobody says this is true because Spinoza said so. Nobody, zero, right? And this kid's telling me Spinoza's right. Spinoza's right. So you're off the map. I asked his father, did he have any traumatic experience as a child? Anything? No. Father's a doctor. My wife did some research with one of the rabbis. He was in Merkaz HaTorah for a while. And I was when he was about 8, he had a brother who died of cancer. Brother got cancer. The whole community davened for him. He got better. Then he had a relapse. They davened for him, and he died. He didn't have any tragedy. He just had a younger brother who died of cancer. That's all. So, what does this kid say? God failed me. My father's not dealing with it. So he's failing me? What's in it for him? He has no place. So he says, this place has got nothing to offer me, so I'm going elsewhere. It sounds very selfish, but in a way you could say, the very least you have to do for a person is he has to feel he has a place. You can't expect a person to live with something and sacrifice for it and believe in it if he has no place. It's asking too much. So I think a person can be overwhelmed by experiences like this, and when they are overwhelmed, now there are psychologists who deal with this. There's psychology for trauma. I don't know what it is. I can't give any suggestions in concrete terms what to do, but there are people who deal with these things. One person who's very good, I know him personally, is Usher Wade. Usher Wade is an amazing person. He was a Protestant minister in the United States. He went to Germany to do his doctorate in Methodist Christian theology, and he met some Ger Hasidim, and that was that. Came back to America, started to work and became a Ger Tzedek, and he came back and he got connected to the Baltimore community. And the Baltimore community said to him, you shouldn't be working, you should go to yeshiva. They sponsored him to come to us for 2 years. After he came for 2 years, he stayed on, and married, as a family, and he got trained as a therapist. And he works here in Yerushalayim as a therapist. And he has wide-ranging experience of his own, and he's related to other people who can help people get connected with. So if there was a person who was dealing with the problem, who somebody else needed to deal with the problem, needed a consultation to deal with the problem, then I would recommend getting in touch with Usher Wade, and you can tell him that I sent you. He plays the violin. He knows a good deal of philosophy and some mathematics. I mean, he's a ger chassid. I mean, that's what his identification is.
What would we say? Like, some people, they feel disconnected not because they have disabilities that separates them from the norm of the community, whatever the norm is, but because they want to bring in things which the community says don't bring in, or bring it in a certain way. So then he's the one, meaning it's happening because he's feeling disconnected for many reasons, like even bishluchim wise, but it's his fault. He's deciding, like, does the community say, we have to make a place for him? He's doing things that the community thinks is negative for their community.
Yeah, I didn't say that the community has to make a place for everybody. Maybe I spoke too strongly before. We're talking here about children who have learning disabilities. It's something that's absolutely not their fault, something over which they have absolutely no control. You live in a community, there are going to be compromises. That's inevitable. There's no way to live in a community without compromises. So you look for a community with which you have the best possible fit, but always there are going to be things which you would like to do and they don't want to do, and you have to give up on that. The whole idea that I'm living as an individual and everybody else can drop because I need what I need is nonsense. It's childish. It's childish. When you get to be 10 years old, you should outgrow that. I think, again, my own private feeling, that's one of the differences between men and women when it comes to davening. A man has to daven a minyan. There's no minyan that does what I want to do, because there are 10 of us. And at some point or other, you have to give in on something. And a man is forced to overcome his individuality when he goes to minyan. A woman can daven at home. She doesn't have to daven on the minyan. She can daven when she wants, given children and pressures and everything else, as long as she wants, out loud or quietly. She's got much more freedom to be herself in davening. I think that's a qualitative difference. I think it's because men need to submerge their egos. Women are more naturally connected and more naturally give and take with others. And you have to force yourself to make yourself work together with the other 9 people, or other 50 people. So I think asking a person to give up on the things that he wants because the community won't stand for it, yes, I think that's right. The community has every right to set standards when it's something that's a matter of choice. And communities change. I think there isn't probably from community in the world today without exercise facilities. 30 years ago it wasn't that way. Borough Park, there's state of the art, treadmills with videos and top stuff, and Hasidim go there, and so it can happen that it will change. But in the meantime, if the person wants to receive the New York Times to his mailbox every morning, he better not.
Or he wants to do beekeeping, that's also not accepted. I mean, something as mundane as that has nothing to do with Ashkafa. Is also found.
Why do you think that's not accepted?
Some communities.
What? I mean, the guy he's raising honey for a living. He has a farm, and he, huh?
Probably.
I
mean, I'm from community. I'm saying there's many things which are very mundane, which is just anything tiny bit out of the box is suddenly weird.
I can't imagine about that. But if you keep a dog, then there are people who say a tummy animal is something, especially if you have children.
Rabbit's okay suddenly.
Huh?
Somehow rabbit's okay, dog isn't.
Oh, okay. Now, there are people who say you shouldn't have a tummy animal around. Okay, that's it. But beekeeping? So there are people who would ostracize someone because he kept bees? I can't imagine that. But it's not, as long as it wasn't hurting anybody else, it'd just be, a little funny. Maybe if you have a community of Sachachol, 42 people, and they all have to be the same. But if you have, like Satma has tens of thousands of families, there are certainly variations there. Beekeeping, I would imagine, would be a very minor one.